The game had just begun. 1 minute after the divorce decree was in my hand, I immediately cut off the $150,000 annual allowance for my sister-in-law studying in California. My ex-husband called, furious. If you cut her off, my sister could get kicked out of school. I laughed. There's an even bigger surprise waiting for you tomorrow. I held the divorce decree, the paper still warm from the court seal, but my heart was as cold as ice after a winter that had lasted 5 years. It had been only 1 minute, exactly 1 minute, since I was officially no longer the wife of the man named Ethan. I stood on the steps of the county courthouse. The June sun beat down on the asphalt, but my mind was strangely clear. There were no tears, no trembling, not a single shred of doubt. I opened my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. James, cancel all of Ashley's allowances. On the other end, my personal assistant paused for a moment, then his voice became cautious. Understood. Ma'am. All of them, including tuition, living expenses, and the apartment lease? All of them. Block all accounts, effective immediately. Yes, ma'am. I understand. I hung up the phone. It had only taken 1 minute. For 5 years, I had supported someone who was not my own flesh and blood with over $150,000 annually. Now, all it took was a single sentence to end it. I looked up. Ethan was standing in front of me, still in his impeccable suit, still radiating his usual air of confidence. A faint winner's smile played on his lips. Claire, you finally came to your senses. He straightened his cuffs, his tone one of relief as if he'd just shed a heavy burden. You should have signed this 3 months ago. Why drag it out until now? But oh well, what's important is that it's over. I looked at him. The man I had once trusted so completely, the man I had once loved so deeply that I thought my entire life would be enough with just him. Don't worry. Ethan continued in a condescending tone. Even though you're not getting any assets, as a thank you for our 5 years of marriage, I'll transfer you $25,000 to get you started. $25,000. I let out a small laugh. 5 years of marriage exchanged for $25,000. If this were me 5 years ago, I might have been moved to tears. But now, I just found it incredibly amusing. So much so that I wanted to ask him in return. Who, exactly, is giving charity to whom? I glanced at the decree in my hand, gently stroking its cover. Ethan, I said slowly, I want to ask you one thing. He frowned slightly, but nodded anyway. Go ahead. Your sister Ashley needs over $150,000 a year for her studies in California. Do you know where that money came from? Ethan was stunned for a moment, then laughed out loud. Claire, we just got divorced and you're already talking nonsense. That's company money. What does it have to do with you? I nodded, glancing at my watch. 30 seconds had passed. September of 2020, I said in a flat tone. Ashley got into college, but her scholarship wasn't enough. At the time, your company was facing a cash flow problem. So I transferred $80,000 from my personal account to pay her first year's tuition. The smile on Ethan's face began to stiffen. From 2021 to 2023, I continued, every year I transferred over $150,000, covering tuition, rent for her apartment, and living expenses. It's all clearly documented as support for Ashley. You're making this up, Ethan seethed. Do I need to print out the bank statements? I looked him straight in the eye. And again, last year, Ashley wanted a new car because her friends there were driving luxury vehicles. You came to me asking for help, and I transferred another $60,000 to you. Ethan's face went from white to a deathly pale. That was company money, wasn't it? I smiled. It was my money. The air between us suddenly felt so heavy it was hard to breathe. Just then, my phone rang. An international call. I answered it and put it on speaker. Claire, what is this? Ashley's shrill, angry voice came from the other side. Why are all my cards blocked? I'm at a boutique, and everyone's looking at me like I'm a thief. Do you know how humiliating this is? I listened to her, then said softly, Ashley, from today on, you're on your own. What? Your brother and I are divorced. I no longer have any obligation to support you. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then an explosion. Especially since you divorced him, you owe me compensation. I have tuition due soon, not to mention this new bag I was just looking at. I hung up without a second thought. Ethan stared at me, his eyes red with rage. Claire, reactivate Ashley's accounts immediately. I tilted my head, looking at him as if he were a stranger. She's your sister, so you support her. Aren't you a successful businessman? It was a light sentence, but it was enough to silence him. I knew better than anyone. The business empire Ethan was so proud of was really just a magnificent shell. Its cash flow had been stretched as tight as a guitar string for a long time. If it weren't for my money quietly propping it up, the company would have collapsed last year. He was speechless. His phone rang. This time, it was his mother. He glanced at it, then I watched as he declined the call and blocked the number. "Claire, you're insane," Ethan snarled. "You want to destroy my entire family." I laughed. "Destroy?" I stepped closer, my voice lowering. "Last year, when you hired people to corner me on the street, to threaten me into signing the divorce papers. Did you ever think about destruction then?" Ethan's eyes flickered for a second. I stared at him intently. "These past 5 years, it's not that I didn't know. I was just giving you a chance." I paused. "But now I realize there are some things that will never change, no matter how many chances you give them." I turned to leave. Behind me, Ethan's voice was filled with rage. "Claire, you'll regret this." I didn't turn back, just gave a light wave of my hand. "Don't worry. There's an even bigger surprise waiting for you tomorrow." A black car parked on the side of the road opened its door. My driver bowed. "Miss Claire." I got into the car. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Ethan standing frozen under the hot sun. His expression shifted from anger, to confusion, and then slowly, to fear. He had no idea that this car was the cheapest of all the assets I owned. Just as he had no idea that the wife he'd underestimated all this time was never just an ordinary woman. I leaned back in the seat, closed my eyes, and took a long, deep breath. 5 years, finally over. But this was just the beginning. The car moved slowly through the midday traffic. New York City was as noisy as ever, but my heart felt strangely calm. As if after a long storm, I could finally breathe deeply without holding back. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. The buildings rushed by, familiar streets suddenly feeling foreign. Because from this moment on, my life had turned in a completely different direction. "Straight to the office, Miss Claire?" my driver asked through the rearview mirror. "Yes, to the office," I replied curtly. My voice was flat. The phone in my hand vibrated again. A text from an unknown number. "Claire, you're going to pay for this." I didn't need to guess. I knew it was from Ethan. I stared at the message for a few seconds, then replied with a single sentence. "The game has just begun." After sending it, I immediately blocked the number. No more words were necessary. The car stopped in front of a skyscraper in the heart of the city. The sun reflected off the large nameplate at its peak. 4 words, "The Sterling Group," gleamed. This was my company. A fact that, for 5 years, Ethan never knew. He always thought I was just a minor shareholder, an ordinary woman who only knew how to manage a household and occasionally inject some capital. He didn't know that all the investments that saved his company, all the contracts that helped him survive, had all passed through my hands. I stepped out of the car, and the automatic doors slid open. "Good afternoon, Miss Claire." The receptionists bowed in unison. I gave a brief nod and walked straight to the private elevator to the top floor. The elevator doors opened. My secretary, Linda, was already waiting with a stack of documents. "Miss Claire, the lawyer, Mr. Peterson, has arrived and is waiting in the conference room. Also, someone from Apex Innovations just called asking about this quarter's investment tranche." I kept walking. Let the lawyer wait 5 more minutes. As for the investment, delay it. Linda was momentarily stunned. "But according to the contract..." "I know what the contract says," I cut her off, my voice still light. "But it also includes a risk review clause in the event of major instability. Ethan just got a divorce. That is instability." Linda immediately nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." I entered my office. The glass door closed behind me, and silence enveloped the room. I walked to the window, gazing down at the streams of traffic that looked like tiny dots. In my mind, I replayed the image of Ethan's frozen face in front of the courthouse. He still didn't understand what was happening, but soon, he would. "Miss Claire," Linda knocked on the door. "Mr. Peterson is ready." I turned and nodded. "Send him in." Mr. Peterson entered. He had a strong posture and a sharp gaze, the hallmark of a lawyer accustomed to handling complex cases. "Miss Claire, I've prepared the files." He placed a thick stack of documents on my desk. "I've gathered all the evidence of asset transfers by Mr. Ethan, falsified financial reports, and proof of his infidelity. If we take this to court, we can not only reclaim the assets but also sue for damages." I sat down and opened the file, flipping through the pages. The numbers, copies of bank statements, Photographs, it was all so clear and undeniable. What's the total loss? I asked. Mr. Peterson thought for a moment. At least $30 million. $30 million. I closed the file and placed it on the desk. I don't need the money. He looked slightly surprised. You mean? I want Apex Innovations to go bankrupt. The room fell silent for a few seconds. Mr. Peterson looked at me, his expression of surprise slowly shifting to one of seriousness. That will be far more complicated, ma'am. I know. It will take time, resources, and it might drag on. I'm not short on time. I looked straight at him. I just need the result. Mr. Peterson nodded slowly. Very well, ma'am. I'll get started immediately. As soon as he left, my phone rang again. This time it was my best friend, Chloe. Claire, is it done? Is the divorce final? Her voice was full of excitement. It is. Oh, thank God. Finally. We're celebrating tonight, my treat. I let out a small laugh. Sounds good. Oh, and did you cut off the money for Ashley? I did. I bet that girl is throwing a fit right now. I just got 3 irate voicemails from her, I said flatly. Chloe laughed heartily. Serves her right. All this time she's treated you like a walking ATM. I was quiet for a moment. It wasn't that I didn't know. It was just that, back then, I did it willingly. Claire, Chloe's voice suddenly softened. Are you okay? I looked out the window. The afternoon sun had begun to mellow. I am, I said, a single, short answer. But this time, it was the truth. Good, Chloe said. Now, it's his turn to pay for everything. I didn't reply, just smiled faintly and hung up. The afternoon passed quickly. Just as I expected, as the workday came to a close, the news began to break. Apex Innovations faces default risk. Partners delay joint ventures. Banks review loan agreements. I sat at my desk, reading each headline with a detached gaze. My phone buzzed. Ethan was calling. I looked at the screen, let it ring until it stopped, then declined it. A moment later, a series of texts came through. Claire, are you behind this? Why was the investment halted? Pick up the phone, we need to talk. I read them all, then deleted them without replying. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time from a different number. I answered it. Claire. What are you doing? Ethan's voice was hoarse, clearly having lost his composure. What are you talking about? I asked lightly. The investment, the banks, the partners. It's all happening at once. You think I can't figure it out? I leaned back in my chair. Your company isn't doing well. Why are you asking me? Don't play dumb, he snarled. Claire, we were married, for God's sake. Do you have to take it this far? I was silent for a few seconds, then asked in return. When you were transferring all the assets so I would leave with nothing, did you remember we were married? On the other end, silence. I continued, my voice steady. When you were bringing other women to the office, to hotels, did you remember we were married? When you hired people to corner me on the street, did you remember we were married? I cut him off, not raising my voice, but each word felt like a sharp jab. On the other end, there was complete silence. After a long moment, Ethan's voice lowered. What do you want? He had finally asked the right question. I looked outside as dusk began to fall over the city. You'll find out, I said, then hung up, giving him no further chance to speak. That night, I stood alone in my office. The city lights spread out below me like a sea of man-made stars. I raised a glass of wine, swirling it slowly. The deep red liquid spun, reflecting the glittering lights. For 5 years, I thought if I just tried a little harder, was a little more patient, things would get better. It turns out, there are people who will always take your sacrifices for granted, no matter how much you give. I took a sip of the wine. It was bitter, but liberating. My phone lit up. A new headline. Apex Innovations $20 million loan officially suspended. I smiled. Ethan, I whispered. This is just the beginning. Outside, the city continued its festival of lights, and inside me, one door had closed, and another was slowly, surely, opening. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because of work demands, but because of a strange feeling. Relief, yet also a keen sense of alertness, as if I couldn't let my guard down for a single moment. I understood that what happened yesterday was merely the opening act. A bigger wave was still coming, and if I didn't watch my step, I could be swept back under. I made a cup of coffee and stood on the balcony, looking out at the city that was still half asleep. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the rooftops. My mind replayed every step I had taken over the last 5 years. Every dollar I spent, every time I gave in, every time I looked the other way, and every time I told myself, just a little longer. I closed my eyes. No more. Not anymore. The phone rang. It was James, my assistant. Miss Claire, there's been significant movement at Apex Innovations this morning. I wasn't surprised. Tell me. The bank has officially sent a debt collection warning. Several partners are also demanding immediate payment. Right now, there are a few suppliers gathered in front of their office demanding payment. I took a sip of my coffee. My voice remained flat. Has the media picked it up? Yes, ma'am. All the major financial and business news outlets are covering it. The story is spreading very quickly. Keep pushing it. Yes, ma'am. I hung up. Everything was proceeding according to my plan. Not faster, not slower. Right on schedule. I changed and left for the office early. As soon as I entered the lobby, the atmosphere was different. Employees walked faster, spoke in hushed tones. Everyone knew something big was happening, they just didn't dare say it out loud. Miss Claire, Linda approached, her face serious. Apex Innovations sent someone to meet with you. I kept walking. I don't want to see them. It's their CFO, ma'am. That's precisely why I don't need to see him. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and silence fell. Sometimes, silence is the clearest answer. As soon as I reached the top floor, my phone began ringing incessantly. Ethan. I glanced at the screen and didn't answer. It was followed by a text. Claire, I know it's you. The company's situation is critical. Don't go too far. Let's talk. I read it, then put my phone down without replying. A few minutes later, another call came in. This time, from his mother. I paused for a moment, then answered. Claire, what are you doing? Her voice was a shrill cry of fury. Ethan's company is about to be destroyed. You also cut off Ashley's money. Are you trying to kill us all? I stood by the window, watching the flow of traffic below. Ma'am, I said slowly, Ethan and I are divorced. So what if you're divorced? You're still Ashley's sister-in-law. She's over there all by herself. If you don't take care of her, who will? I let out a small laugh. Sister-in-law. Even now, she could still say that. You're mistaken, ma'am, I said. My voice calm but cold. As of yesterday, I am no longer part of your family. From now on, Ethan and Ashley's affairs have nothing to do with me. There was a brief silence on the other end, then her tone turned cynical. I knew you were no good. You act so nice on the surface, but you're a calculating schemer underneath. You're the one who ruined my son. I listened without interrupting. Only after she had finished did I reply softly. Do you know where Ethan's company started? She was taken aback. Of course, from his own hard work. From the $300,000 I gave him as seed money from the sale of my mother's apartment, I said, each word clear. Do you know where his first major contract came from? There was no answer from the other side. From one of my father's connections. The line went silent. I continued, my voice not raised, but every word was a pinpoint strike. His company almost went bankrupt 3 times, and each time, I was the one who put up the money to save it. You say I'm no good. Then what have I been for the last 5 years? The other end was dead silent. After a long moment, her voice weakened. But that was your duty as a wife. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. No, I said. That was kindness. I hung up the phone. There was nothing more to say. There are people who will never understand, no matter how much you explain. Or perhaps they understand, but simply refuse to accept it. That afternoon, the news exploded with even greater force. Apex Innovations on the brink of bankruptcy. Employees face unpaid wages. Partners withdraw en masse. I sat in my office, reading the headlines, feeling no satisfaction, no joy. Only a sense of calm. Because I knew this wasn't revenge. This was a consequence. A consequence of his own actions. Just then, my office door opened. Linda entered, her voice slightly panicked. Miss Claire, Mr. Ethan is downstairs. I looked up. He says he has to see you. I was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Send him up. Linda looked a little surprised. Yes, ma'am. I swiveled in my chair to face the window. My hands were folded in my lap. It was time. The door opened. Ethan walked in. In just one night, he looked like a different person. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was crooked, and his eyes were red with dark circles. His entire being radiated an exhaustion and panic I had never seen before. He stood before me, not speaking immediately, just staring as if trying to find the woman he thought he knew inside and out. "Sit down," I said. He didn't sit. "Claire, are you really going to do this?" His voice was hoarse. I looked at him without answering right away. He took a step forward. "This company is everything to me. You know that. If it's gone, I have nothing left." I tilted my head slightly. "And if you have nothing left? So what?" He was stunned, likely not expecting me to ask that back. "Claire," his voice lowered. "We were married once." I let out a small laugh. "You just remembered?" A single question was enough to silence him. I stood up and walked slowly toward him. "Ethan," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "If I hadn't fought back yesterday, what would I be right now?" He didn't speak. "Empty-handed," I answered for him. "No money, no home, no company, and still having to bear the shame." I paused. "Did you ever think about that?" His hands clenched into fists. "I could have given you a settlement." "A settlement?" I laughed. "With what?" He fell silent. I turned and walked back toward the window. "You didn't come here to apologize," I said. "You came here to ask for money." The air in the room felt heavy. He didn't deny it, because he knew it was true. After a long moment, he said, "Claire, what do you want?" I turned to look at him, my eyes no longer holding any trace of softness. "You'll find out soon enough," I said. "But not today." I pressed the intercom button. "Linda, please escort Mr. Ethan out." Ethan stood there. He looked like he wanted to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. He just turned and left. The door closed, and the room was quiet again. I stood there, staring at the empty space before me. Not happy, not sad. Just the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The door had just closed behind Ethan. I stood still for a long time, staring at the empty space before me. Not because I was hesitant, but because I wanted to be certain that there was no lingering emotion in my heart that could make me waver. Because I knew very well that from this moment on, there was no turning back. "Miss Claire," Linda stood beside me, her voice soft. "Should I continue to monitor Mr. Ethan's side?" I shook my head slowly. "No need to monitor." I turned and sat back down. "Just report. Monitoring is an act for someone who is still attached. As for me, I only need to know enough to maintain control." Linda nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Just as she was about to turn, the phone on my desk rang. I picked it up. "Miss Claire, the bank would like to confirm some information regarding Apex Innovations loan." A man's voice on the other end was firm and clear. "What is their situation?" "They have been officially classified as a high-risk client. If there's no capital injection within the next 72 hours, we will begin the asset seizure process." I was silent for a moment. 72 hours. 3 days. Enough time for a company to either survive or be completely destroyed. "Let it be," I said. "No intervention is necessary." "Understood, ma'am." I hung up the phone. In my mind, every number and deadline appeared with the clarity of a pre-drawn map. I didn't need to guess. I knew exactly what would happen next. That afternoon, I left the office early. Not to rest, but to visit a place I hadn't been to in a very long time. My mother's old house. The iron gate was the same, its paint peeling. Vines crept up the corners of the walls. Almost nothing had changed. Only its inhabitant was gone. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was quiet, smelling of old wood, time, and memories. I walked slowly through each room, my hand brushing against the faded walls. I imagined my mother's face in the past, sitting by the window, diligently sewing. "Claire, money isn't everything," her voice seemed to echo here. "But if you have it, don't ever let anyone use it to oppress you." I paused, closing my eyes for a moment. I didn't fully understand that sentence back then. Now, I did. I went into my mother's bedroom, opened a drawer, and took out a small wooden box. Inside were documents, a property deed, and her will. I hadn't opened it in the last 5 years. Not because I didn't dare, but because I didn't feel the need. But today, I opened it. Every line of writing was clear and firm. All of my mother's estate was left to me, including this house and a number of shares in a company Ethan had never known about. I let out a small, light laugh. It turned out that from the very beginning, I had more than he ever imagined. I had simply chosen to remain silent. I closed the box and took it with me. By the time I left the house, it was starting to get dark. The streetlights had just come on, casting a pale yellow glow on the small street. I paused for a moment at the gate, looking back inside. "I understand now, Mom," I whispered, then walked away. That night, I didn't go back to my apartment. I went somewhere else, a lavish restaurant at the top of a skyscraper, a place where I could see the entire cityscape at night. Chloe was already waiting there. You finally made it, she waved. I approached and sat down. You look completely different, Claire. Different how? That foolish, patient look is gone. I laughed. A bit harsh, but true. Chloe shrugged. I can't believe you put up with him for so long. Now that I think about it, I get angry for you. I didn't argue, because she was right. The waiter brought our food. We ate and chatted, the atmosphere much more relaxed. So, anyway, Chloe leaned in. How far are you planning to take this? I put down my glass. Until he understands. Understands what? That you can't just take things without paying the price. Chloe was silent for a moment, then nodded. Agreed. My phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. I am a director at Bank X. We would like to discuss the Apex Innovations debt with you. I read the message and smiled. The bait has been taken. Chloe raised an eyebrow. What's the new plan? I didn't answer immediately, just gazed out the window at the flickering city lights. You'll see tomorrow, I said. The next morning, I arrived at the bank as scheduled. The meeting room was spacious with cold, white lighting. A middle-aged man in a suit stood up as I entered. Miss Claire. He extended his hand. I'm Mr. Harris. I shook his hand and sat down. We've reviewed Apex Innovations' profile, he said, getting straight to the point. The situation is dire. I know. We wanted to ask if you would be interested in participating in the restructuring. I looked at him. Under what terms? He gave a slight smile. You would be in control. I wasn't surprised. This was the next step. And Ethan would be removed from management. I leaned back in my chair, silent for a few seconds, then said, agreed. A single word. But it was enough. The game had officially entered a new phase. When I left the bank, my phone rang. Ethan. This time, I answered. Claire, you met with the bank, didn't you? His voice was frantic. I did. What? What are you going to do? I stopped on the sidewalk, watching the people pass by. You'll find out. Claire, don't. Goodbye, Ethan. I hung up before he could finish. A gentle breeze blew. I continued on my way, each step firm, without looking back. After leaving the bank, I didn't go straight back to the office. I walked along a familiar street, the cool morning air on my face, enough to clear my head and re-strategize the next steps in a plan I had been preparing for a long time. It was just that today, everything was officially on the table. My phone vibrated nonstop. I didn't need to look to know who was calling. Ethan. I didn't answer this time. Not because I was avoiding him, but because it wasn't time yet. Some answers need to be waited for to carry more weight. When I arrived in the office lobby, Linda was already there to greet me, her expression a little tense. Miss Claire, there was a commotion at Apex Innovations this morning. I paused. Tell me. The employees gathered out front demanding their salaries. Some resigned on the spot. The media is already there. I nodded slowly, unsurprised. When a company runs out of money, the first reaction always comes from within. Has the bank sent official notice? Yes, ma'am. They will likely start taking further steps today or tomorrow. I stepped into the elevator. Prepare all the documents. Linda understood immediately. Yes, ma'am. The elevator doors closed. Inside that small space, my reflection in the glass walls was clear. A woman standing tall with an unwavering gaze. A stark contrast to the me of the past, who could be thrown into a day of anxiety by a single phone call from Ethan. I took a slow breath. Not of fatigue, but of final release. Arriving at my office, just as I sat down, the phone rang. This time, I answered it. Claire, Ethan's voice was almost a shout. What do you really want? I placed the phone on my desk and switched it to speaker. My voice was calm. Ethan, you've lost control. I don't need a lecture from you, he snarled. The employees are on strike, the bank is calling in the debt, partners are canceling contracts, all at once. If you're not behind this, who is? I didn't answer directly, just asked in return. Have you ever considered why it's all happening at once? On the other end, there was a moment of silence, then he laughed coldly. Stop beating around the bush. Just tell me what you want. I leaned back in my chair. Because the foundation you built has been fragile for a long time. I just stopped propping it up. A single sentence was enough to unravel everything. He didn't speak, only his heavy breathing could be heard. After a long time, his voice softened. Claire, I know I was wrong. I wasn't surprised. When people are cornered, they say things they never thought they would. I shouldn't have treated you like that. I shouldn't have done all those things. I remained silent, letting him speak. Can you just give me one more chance? In the past, that sentence might have melted my heart. But now, a chance for what? I asked. To fix everything. I smiled faintly. Fix your mistakes, or save your company? On the other end, silence. No answer was needed. I already knew. You called all your partners last night, didn't you? I continued. But no one answered. You also went to the bank, but they refused to see you. I paused for a moment. Do you know why? Because they don't trust you anymore. My voice wasn't loud, but each word was clear. The other end was dead silent. After a long time, he asked, Claire, what should I do? I looked out the window. The sun was high in the sky. Come to my office this afternoon, I said. Alone. I hung up, without further explanation. At exactly 3 p.m., Ethan appeared. This time, there was no more panic in his expression, but the exhaustion on his face was palpable. His eyes no longer held arrogance, but a sort of resignation. He entered the room, didn't speak right away, just stood there. I didn't think you would come, I said. I have no other choice, he replied. I nodded. Sit. He sat down. His hands rested on his knees, his head slightly bowed. For the first time, I saw him in a position lower than mine. Not because I was oppressing him, but because he had brought himself to this point. I'll be direct, I began. The bank has agreed to let me participate in your company's restructuring. He immediately looked up. What? I will be taking control. The air in the room seemed to freeze. He stared at me in disbelief. And me? You, I continued, will be stepping down from your management position. No way. He shot up from his seat. That's my company. Was. I corrected him with a single word. But it was enough. He stood there, his breath ragged. Claire, you're stealing it from me. I looked at him. No, I said, I'm just taking back what is rightfully mine. He was stunned. I opened a drawer, took out a stack of documents, and placed them on the desk. Have a look. He took them, flipping through the pages one by one. His expression slowly changed. This is proof of all the funds I ever invested in your company, I said. Including the ones you never recorded. He fell silent. I continued. The total is more than $10 million. The room became deathly quiet. He dropped the documents, his hands trembling slightly. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, I looked him straight in the eye. Because you never asked. It was a light sentence, so heavy that he couldn't argue. He sat back down, his hands covering his face. His voice was hoarse. Do you really want to destroy me? I was silent for a moment, then said, no. He looked up. I'm giving you a way out. I pushed another document toward him. Sign this. You'll step down from the company, but in return, you won't be held liable for all of its debts. He stared at me, his eyes filled with internal conflict. If you don't sign, in 3 days, the company will be bankrupt, I said. And you will lose everything. It wasn't a threat, just a fact. He looked down, silent for a very long time. So long that I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, he picked up a pen and signed it. A single, decisive stroke, as if severing the past. He put the pen down and sat there quietly, saying nothing. I took the document back. Thank you, he laughed, a dry, hollow sound. Thank you? He shook his head. Claire, you've changed. I looked at him. No, I said. I've just stopped being the person I used to be. He stood up and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused for a moment, but didn't turn around. Then he was gone. The door closed. I sat there in silence. Not happy, not sad. Just relieved. A relief I had been waiting for 5 years. The door closed behind Ethan. This time, it wasn't a confrontation or a lingering threat. It was the true end of everything that had transpired over the last 5 years. I sat quietly for a moment, my hand still resting on the freshly signed document. I stared at the ink stroke. My heart was calm. Not because I was cold, but because all the emotions that once existed had long since been exhausted. Miss Claire, Linda knocked and entered. The bank just confirmed that the transfer process will begin this afternoon. I nodded. Prepare the conference room. I'll be participating directly. Yes, ma'am. Linda left. I stood up, straightened my clothes, and looked at my reflection in the glass one more time. My gaze was the same, calm, clear, and unwavering. This was no longer personal. This was business. At 3 p.m., The top-floor conference room was brightly lit, the atmosphere serious. Almost no one spoke outside of necessity. Representatives from the bank, Mr. Peterson, my finance team, and several senior managers from Apex Innovations were present. Only Ethan was absent. I didn't ask, because I knew his role in this room was over. "Let's begin," I said, my voice clear. Documents were opened, each clause was read, every number verified. Everything moved quickly, yet meticulously. No detail was overlooked. I sat at the head of the table, not speaking much. But every time I did speak, it was a decision. "The $20 million debt will be restructured," said the bank representative. "On the condition of a fresh capital injection and a change in management." "I will be responsible for the funds," I replied. "And all management control will be transferred to Miss Claire." "Correct." No one objected. They knew there was no other choice. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By the time it was over, the sky outside was beginning to darken. The city lights began to switch on, reflecting against the glass walls of the conference room. I signed the final document and put down the pen. A very distinct feeling emerged. Not victory, but closure. One chapter was closed. "Congratulations, Miss Claire," Mr. Peterson said, his voice full of relief. "From now on, everything is in your hands." I nodded. "Thank you, sir." Everyone slowly departed, and the room grew quiet. I remained seated there for a few more minutes, gazing out the window at the relentless flicker of the lights. My phone vibrated. An unknown number. I answered. "Claire?" A familiar voice. "Ashley. What is it?" I asked directly. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then the sound of sobbing. "Claire, please. Please transfer some money. I'm about to be kicked out of school." Her voice was no longer shrill like before, but trembling with panic. "I already called Ethan. But he doesn't have any money." I wasn't surprised. "Ashley," I said, "how old are you now?" 22. "In that case, how long do you think I have an obligation to support you?" On the other end, silence, just the sound of sobs. "But you've always." "I've always done it because I wanted to," I cut in. "Now I don't." A long silence. "Claire," her voice grew small. "I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I was softening, but because I was thinking. "I'm not going to transfer any money," I said, then paused. "But I can give you one option." On the other end, immediate silence. "What did you say?" "Work. Part-time or full-time. You're old enough." "But I'm in college." "I just took over your brother's company," I said in a flat tone. "If you want, I can recommend you for a job at one of our branches there." There was no sound from the other end, perhaps disbelief. "Earn your own money, pay your own tuition," I continued. "No one is going to support you anymore." After a long moment, Ashley whispered. "Claire, are you really not going to help me anymore?" I opened my eyes, looking out at the city. "No," I hung up without hesitation. "There are people who will never learn to stand on their own 2 feet if you don't stop propping them up." That night, I went home quite late. The apartment was quiet. No more barrage of texts, no more stressful phone calls. I put down my bag, went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and leaned against the counter in silence. A silence I once feared now felt comfortable. My phone lit up. A text from an unsaved number. "Claire, it's Ethan." I saw it but didn't reply. The next message. "I've moved out of the company. I have nothing left. Tonight I'm sitting at our old cafe. I don't know why I'm texting you, but..." The message ended there, unfinished. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then turned it off. I didn't go, didn't reply, didn't look back. I stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was gentle, bringing a cool breeze that no longer made me shiver as it used to. I stood there, looking down at the city. The lights were still on, the traffic still flowed, and everything kept moving. Even though someone had lost everything, the world didn't stop spinning. And neither did I. I went back inside, closing the door. A day had ended without ties, without burdens. There was only me. The next morning, I woke up a little later than usual. Not out of fatigue, but because for the first time in years, I was no longer awakened by an invisible pressure weighing on my chest. There was no longer a sense of urgency to check my phone to see if Ethan's company was in trouble, if Ashley needed money, or if my mother-in-law was calling to blame me for something. Instead, there was a tangible silence where I could lie for a few extra minutes, watching the sunlight filter through the curtains, and realize that my life was finally back where it should be. I got out of bed, made a cup of coffee, and stood by the window, observing the city begin its daily hustle. My mind was no longer filled with complex calculations, but with a rare clarity, like the surface of the water after a storm. Finally calm, I could see the bottom, see everything that had been hidden for so long. The phone rang. Linda. Miss Claire, the situation at the new company has started to stabilize this morning. But some of the old managers from Mr. Ethan's era seem uncooperative. I wasn't surprised. Every shift in power inevitably triggers a reaction, especially from those accustomed to being on top who now have to submit to someone they once underestimated. Send me their names, I said, my voice calm but firm. Anyone who is unwilling to cooperate, terminate them. Linda was silent for a moment, then answered quickly. Yes, ma'am. I understand. I hung up and sipped my coffee. Its bitterness spread on my tongue but no longer felt unpleasant. Because this time, I was the one who chose that bitterness, not forced to swallow it as before. Arriving at the office, the atmosphere was already vastly different. No more chaos, no more anxious glances. What remained was watchfulness, observation, and also respect. As I crossed the lobby, every employee stood and greeted me, not excessively, but enough to show that my position was now solid. Miss Claire. A middle-aged manager approached, his voice slightly hesitant. We wanted to know your plans for the future. I stopped and looked at him. Stabilization first, I said. Expansion will come after. He nodded, but his eyes still held a hint of worry. What about Mr. Ethan? I looked at him directly. He is no longer relevant. A short sentence, enough to sever all speculation. I entered my new office. It used to be Ethan's room. Everything was still the same, the desk, the chair, only the person sitting in it had changed. I put down my bag, slowly sat down, and swept my hand across the surface of the desk. The desk where he once sat with such arrogance now held only emptiness. I didn't want to seize this position, but the position itself had returned to where it belonged. In the afternoon, while I was reviewing reports, the phone rang. Chloe. Claire, I just heard the news. What news? You took over his company. That's insane. I thought you were just joking. I smiled faintly. It wasn't a joke, it was a plan. Chloe was silent for a moment, then laughed. Awesome. He had it coming. So, anyway, are you relieved? I looked out the window. The sunlight streamed into the room, bright but not glaring. Relieved, I answered. More relieved than I ever imagined. After hanging up, I continued with my work. The numbers, the business plans, everything seemed clear, no longer distorted by emotion or consideration for others. Everything was back to its essence. Logical, factual, and transparent. As the afternoon wore on, Linda entered, her expression slightly hesitant. Miss Claire, there's someone here to see you. Who? Mr. Ethan. I wasn't surprised, just asked. What did he say? He said this would be the last time. I was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Send him in. Not because I wanted to see him, but because some things need to be ended completely. Ethan entered. This time, there was no suit, no polished appearance, just a simple shirt that was slightly wrinkled. His face was weary, his eyes no longer reflecting a struggle, but a profound exhaustion. He stood in front of my desk, not sitting down. I won't be long, his voice was heavy. I didn't speak, just waited. I just want to ask one thing. I gave a short nod. If I hadn't done all of that back then, would things be different now? A simple question that came too late. I looked at him without flinching. Yes, I answered. They would be very different. He laughed, a very faint but bitter smile. I thought so. Silence for a few seconds. Then he continued in a lower voice. Claire, I'm sorry. I didn't react. Not because I didn't hear him, but because that apology should have come a long, long time ago. I know it doesn't mean anything now, he continued. But I still wanted to say it. I looked at him and gave a brief nod. I know. Just one phrase. Not forgiving, not hating, just an acknowledgement. He stood there for a few more seconds, then turned. Before leaving, he stopped. Claire. I didn't turn my head. I'll take care of myself. I didn't answer. The door closed. This time, it was truly the last. I sat there, looking at the empty space before me. There was no turmoil in my heart. No satisfaction, no regret. Only a profound calm, like when someone has completed a long journey and can finally stop without needing to look back. Outside, dusk began to fall. The city was lighting up again. Another day was ending. But this time, it wasn't the end of a series of sufferings, but the continuation of a new life. A life where I was no longer a shadow, no longer a silent supporter, but the person in control of my own path. I stood up and walked out of the room. The corridor lights were bright. Every step I took felt steady. Not slow, not rushed. Perfectly in rhythm. After Ethan left, I didn't immediately return to work. I stood for a moment in the corridor, under the lights that stretched out straight, like the path I was now on. Clear. Firm, with no more room for the doubt that had held me back for so long. I took a deep breath and continued walking. Each step felt more solid, as if it had been contemplated for a long time. In the following days, the company slowly stabilized. Not a false stability that masked problems, but a restructuring from the roots up. Every department was reviewed, every expense made transparent, every position filled by the right person. I didn't try to change everything overnight. I understood that something built too quickly can easily collapse. I chose to walk slowly but surely. Like the advice my mother gave me when teaching me to sew. The stitches must be neat, the thread must be strong, so the garment will last. Miss Claire, Linda handed me a stack of reports. The financial situation this week has improved. The cash flow is starting to become positive. I flipped through the pages. The numbers were no longer red, but were beginning to balance, even showing small growth. A change significant enough to prove that the direction I had taken was correct. Maintain this rhythm, I said. No need to rush. Linda nodded. Yes, ma'am. She hesitated for a moment, before adding, oh, and there's news about Mr. Ethan. I paused. What news? He has sold his apartment, moved, and is reportedly looking for a job. I was silent for a few seconds. Not surprised, but not entirely indifferent either. All right. Just one word. No further questions, no comments. Linda understood and excused herself. I continued with my work, but for a moment, an image of the old Ethan flashed in my mind. The man who was always convinced the world was in his grasp. And in just a few days, everything had crumbled. Not because someone else destroyed it, but because its foundation was never strong to begin with. That afternoon, I left the office early. Not for any urgent matter, but because I suddenly wanted to drive around the city, with no destination. Just driving slowly through familiar streets, watching people pass by, a sea of strangers, and realizing that life never revolves around any single person. Whatever we lose or gain, life goes on without waiting. I stopped at a small cafe, chose a quiet corner, ordered a black coffee, and sat doing nothing. Just staring out the window, at the descending dusk, at the silhouettes of people walking by. Each with their own story, their own life. No one knowing each other, no need to know each other. My phone vibrated. A text woman a towel. I opened it. Claire. I started my job. I read it, not replying immediately. The next message came. At a restaurant. The pay isn't great, but I'll try. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then typed a reply. Good. Just one word. No encouragement, no reprimand, but enough. Enough to make her understand that this was a path she had to walk on her own. I put my phone down and sipped my coffee. The familiar bitter taste, but this time there was a hint of sweetness at the end. Very faint, but real. That night, when I arrived home, the city was bathed in light. The lights from the buildings across the way streamed through the balcony window, creating patterns of light and shadow. I stepped outside and stood for a moment. The night air blew gently, carrying a comfortable coolness. I leaned against the railing, looking down. The flow of traffic was still relentless. Like time. My phone lit up again. Another message? Not from Ethan, not from Ashley, but from an old number that hadn't contacted me in a very long time. Claire, it's Arthur, your father's friend. I was stunned for a moment. I just got back from overseas, heard about you, and wanted to meet. I stared at the words. A strange feeling emerged. Not anxiety, not curiosity, but something like another door opening. I didn't reply right away. I just stood there, looking at the city. In my mind, I pictured my father's face, long gone, but the connections he left behind still existed somewhere, quietly enduring. Just like what my mother had bequeathed to me, not ostentatious, but enough to be a pillar when needed. I took a deep breath and replied, of course, Arthur. When are you free? After sending it, I put my phone down. My eyes were still fixed on the distance, on the endless rows of lights. My life was like that, too. It didn't stop here. Didn't end with leaving a marriage, didn't stop with taking back what was lost, but continued on. But this time, not for anyone else, but for myself. I smiled faintly, a very light but real smile. The message from the man who claimed to be my father's friend was still on the screen. Not urgent, not demanding, but creating a deep enough pause for me to realize that life never truly stops at one point. There is always a new path that opens up. Often, at the very moment we think everything is closed off. I stood on the balcony for a while longer, letting the night wind brush against my face as a way to calm myself. Not because I was wavering, but because I wanted to move forward with full awareness, without being pulled back by the past or dragged along by fleeting emotions. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. The atmosphere was much more stable. The wary glances of the first few days had been replaced by focus. Every department was running more smoothly. The financial reports were no longer filled with chaotic numbers, but had started to show order. I walked through the work area, hearing productive work discussions, no longer uncertain whispers. And that made me realize that change doesn't always have to be loud to be effective. Miss Claire, Linda walked beside me, holding a tablet. The meeting with the bank is confirmed for 3 p.m. today. All right. And for the meeting with Arthur, your father's friend. When would you be available? I paused for a moment. Tonight. Linda nodded without further questions. She understood that some things didn't need to be explained. The morning passed quickly. He handled work nonstop. Every decision was made without burden, without needing to consider others' feelings. Based only on one criterion, right or wrong, profitable or not. And it was precisely this clarity that made everything feel lighter, even though the workload hadn't decreased. In the afternoon, the meeting with the bank went smoothly. The restructuring clauses were beginning to show results. The cash flow was under control. The partners' trust was slowly returning, not because of what I said, but because of what I did. Miss Claire, said Mr. Harris, his voice more relaxed than before. If we can maintain this pace, the company could fully recover in 3 months. I nodded. No need to rush, I said. What's important is stability. He smiled. That's something few people can do. I didn't reply, just organized my documents, stood up, and shook his hand to end the meeting. The sky was already starting to darken when I left the bank. I didn't go straight home, but drove to the appointed place. An old tea house on a quiet street, not too fancy, but the atmosphere felt familiar, like the places my father used to like. I entered, looked around, and found an older man sitting in a corner. He stood up when he saw me, his eyes looking emotional, but still calm. Claire, his voice was deep. I approached and bowed my head slightly. Arthur. We sat down. It felt a little awkward at first. Not because of the distance, but because we were both trying to reconnect a thread that had long been forgotten. Arthur, I apologize for only contacting you now, he said. I shook my head. It's all right, Arthur. He looked at me for a moment, then sighed. You look so much like your mother. I was silent. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that, but this time it felt different. Arthur already knows everything, he continued. About your marriage, the company, and everything you've done. I didn't ask how he knew, because it wasn't important. Before your father passed away, he entrusted me with one thing. I was a little surprised. He took an old envelope out of his pocket and placed it on the table. He said, if she ever needs it, give this to her. I looked at the envelope, not rushing to open it. What is this, Arthur? Stock, he said. In a company your father invested in a long time ago, but never in his own name. I looked at him, unable to hide my shock. How much? He smiled faintly. Enough so that you'll never have to compete with anyone again. The atmosphere became quiet. I opened the envelope. Inside were clear, legal documents and a figure that left me speechless for a few seconds. Not out of greed, but because I understood. My father had never truly left me alone. I folded it back up and placed it on the table. Arthur. Please. Keep this for me. He looked at me, a little surprised. You don't need it. It's not that I don't need it now, I said. But I want to know that it's there. He nodded, his gaze satisfied. You're more mature than I thought. I smiled faintly. I've just learned from what has happened. We chatted for a while longer, not too long, but enough to fill the void of many years. When I left the tea house, it was completely dark. The streetlights were on, reflected on the wet asphalt after a light drizzle. I walked slowly to my car. My heart was neither heavy nor light, but perfectly balanced. As if everything was finally in its rightful place, my phone vibrated. A text from Ethan. I got a job. I saw it but didn't reply. The next message, it's not a high-level position, but it's enough to live on. I read it, then turned off the screen. Not because I was cold, but because there was no longer any reason to continue any conversation. I started the car. The car moved slowly through the bright streets. In my mind, there were no more shadows of the past, no more what-if questions. There was only one thing ahead: life doesn't stop. And neither do I. After the meeting with my father's old friend, I didn't take the envelope home. Not because I didn't value it, but because I understood that some things don't need to be held tightly to remain yours. Sometimes, by not rushing to possess them, you can see their value more clearly. I drove slowly through the familiar city streets. The lights reflected on the car's windshield, creating a constantly moving trail of light. In my head, there were no more complex calculations or plans. There was only a silence deep enough for me to ask myself, if all this turmoil hadn't happened, would I have ever broken out of the circle I had created for myself for so many years? The next morning, when I arrived at the office, the atmosphere was completely different from the chaos of the beginning. Everything was running in an orderly fashion, not due to pressure, but due to the stability that was slowly built from firm decisions. I walked through the work area, hearing productive discussions, no longer uncertain whispers. And that made me realize that change doesn't always have to be loud to be effective. Miss Claire, Linda approached, her voice sounding light but quick. The partners from South Korea have confirmed they will continue the contract. They said they trust your leadership. I nodded without much expression. Prepare the documents. Yes, ma'am. Linda turned, then paused for a moment. Oh, and one more thing. I looked at her. Ashley sent an email to the company. I was a little stunned. What email? She applied for an internship at our branch over there. I was silent for a few seconds, then took the tablet Linda offered. I opened the email. The writing was no longer demanding like before, but neat, clear, and with a tone of hesitation. Miss Claire, I know I have no right to ask for anything anymore, but I want to try. If permitted, I am willing to start from the lowest position. I read it, not moved, not cold, just feeling that it made sense. Accept it, I said. Linda was a little surprised. Yes, ma'am. As a regular intern. With no special treatment. Yes, ma'am. I handed back the tablet. There are lessons that must be paid for personally to be meaningful. But if someone truly wants to change, we must also give them a way to start. Not for their sake, but so that we ourselves no longer carry the burden of resentment. In the afternoon, while I was reviewing expansion plans, my phone rang. An unknown number, I answered. Claire, it's me. I froze for a moment. Not my own mother, but Ethan's mother. Her voice was no longer as sharp as before, but heavier and weary. What is it, ma'am? I asked. I want to see you. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was confused, but because I was weighing the meaning of this meeting. Just once. She continued, I won't bother you again. I looked out the window at the bright, but not scorching afternoon sun. This afternoon, I said, at the old cafe. All right. She hung up. At the appointed time, I arrived first and ordered a drink. Not long after, she entered. Her posture was the same, but she looked thinner. Her face no longer radiated sharpness, but a fatigue that couldn't be hidden. Claire, she called out. I stood up and gave a brief nod. Ma'am. We sat down. It was silent at first, not because there was nothing to talk about, but because so much had happened that neither of us knew where to begin. I'm sorry, she said. I wasn't surprised, but I didn't respond. I used to say a lot of things to you that were inappropriate. I looked at her, not interrupting. I thought because you had money, you had an obligation, without ever thinking that it was your choice. Her voice grew smaller. Since Ethan lost everything, I've come to understand. I took a slow breath, not of relief, but of acceptance. I'm not calling you to ask for money, she said quickly, as if afraid I would misunderstand. I just want to say one thing. I waited. Thank you. I was silent. A simple sentence that came too late. I don't dare hope you'll forgive me. She continued, I just want you to know. I understand now what you did. I looked at her for a moment, then gave a brief nod. I know. Nothing more, nothing less. She looked down. Ethan too. He's trying. I didn't ask. I don't expect you to come back, she said. I just hope you live well. I smiled faintly. I am living well, ma'am. She nodded, her eyes slightly wet, then stood up. I'll be going now. I didn't stop her, just sat there watching her leave. Her small back slowly disappeared into the crowd outside. I didn't feel satisfaction. Nor pity. Just a gentle closure, not loud, not dramatic. That night, I went home. I opened the door, the lights came on, and the room felt familiar and quiet. There were no more echoes from the past. I put down my bag, walked to the balcony, and looked down at the city. The lights were still spread out endlessly. My phone lit up. A message from Arthur. Claire. I'll finish all the procedures this week. The stock will be transferred to your name. I saw it and replied. All right, Arthur. I'm ready. After sending it, I put my phone down and took a deep breath. I was no longer in a hurry, because for the first time, I knew exactly where I was going. The days following the meeting with Ethan's mother passed in an orderly fashion. No more major upheavals, no more unexpected surprises, but there was a different feeling. Like the surface of the sea after a storm, no longer wild waves. Just small ripples that served as a reminder that things were once so tumultuous, but were now in the past. I continued to work as usual, handling company affairs, but in my heart, no part of me was pulled backward. That morning, while I was reviewing the market expansion plan, Linda entered with a slightly different expression, not tense, but thoughtful. Miss Claire, there's something I think you should know. I looked up. Tell me. Mr. Ethan had an accident. I paused for a moment. Not in panic, but in shock. Is it serious? Not life-threatening, Linda replied. But he broke his arm. He's in the hospital now. I was silent for a few seconds. The news didn't make me sad, but it didn't leave me entirely indifferent either. After all, he was someone I had walked with for a long time, even if that path ended badly. All right, I said. Thank you for the information. Linda nodded and left. I returned to the document in front of me, but my gaze was no longer fully focused on the numbers. For a fleeting moment, I pictured the recent Ethan, no longer an arrogant man, but someone learning to start from scratch. And now, another trial had come. I put down my pen, looked out the window, and didn't think for too long. In the afternoon, I left the office early. I drove to the hospital. Not out of obligation, not because of any lingering feelings, but because I wanted to close everything completely, without leaving anything hanging in my heart. The hospital corridor felt long, with the distinct smell of antiseptic. I walked slowly, asked for the room number, and then stopped in front of a door with his name written on it. I stood there for a moment without hesitation, then pushed the door open and entered. Ethan was lying in bed, his arm in a cast, his face a little pale. When he saw me, he was stunned, clearly not expecting me to come. Claire, his voice was hoarse. I closed the door and approached. How are you? It's fine, just a small accident. I nodded, pulled up a chair, and sat down. The air between us was no longer tense, no longer heavy. There was just a strange silence, like two strangers who shared a past. I didn't think you would come, he said. Me neither, I replied. He smiled faintly, a smile that was no longer forced. Thank you. I didn't answer, just looked at him. Is your work going well? He asked. It is. Good. A moment of silence. Then he continued, I'm working at a small company now. It's not big, but it's stable. I nodded. That's good. No one calls me director anymore, he laughed. But it's not so bad. I looked at him. For the first time, I saw him talk about his life without any arrogance. I've been thinking a lot, he continued slowly, about everything that happened. I didn't interrupt. I used to think that having money and a title was enough. He stared at the ceiling. It turns out, none of that can hold on to anything. I took a slow breath. Not in agreement, but in understanding. Claire, he turned his head. Are you happy? An unexpected question. I thought for a moment, then answered. Yes. Not a long answer. Not a beautiful one, but an honest one. He nodded, his gaze softening. I'm glad. We didn't talk much more, didn't bring up the past, didn't dig up old wounds. Because we both understood that some things were over and didn't need to be discussed to prove anything. I stood up. Get some rest. He nodded. I will. I turned and walked to the door. Before I left, he called out, Claire. I stopped. Thank you for not completely destroying me. I didn't turn around, just said, I didn't destroy you. I paused. You did it to yourself. Then I stepped out. The door closed. The corridor was still long and bright. I walked, not fast, not slow, but my heart felt a little lighter. Not because I had forgiven, but because there was nothing left to hold on to. Leaving the hospital, it was late afternoon. The golden sunlight spread across the streets. I paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and continued on my way. My phone vibrated. A message from Linda. Miss Claire. The new contract has been signed. I saw it and smiled faintly. Good. Just one word, but it was enough. Life goes on, and this time, I was walking at my own pace. Leaving the hospital, I didn't rush back to the office. I drove slowly through some familiar streets, not to search for something lost, but to feel more clearly that everything had truly changed. Something that once caused me so much pain it was hard to breathe was now just a distant memory, no longer having the power to pull me back. This quiet change was what made me realize how far I had come. In the following days, the rhythm of my life became so stable it was predictable. Mornings at the office, afternoons in meetings, evenings at home. No more sudden calls or messages that made me stop in my tracks. And in that regularity, I slowly understood something I had never realized before. Peace isn't something that comes on its own, it's the result of many firm decisions. Miss Claire, Linda entered the room. Her eyes brighter than usual. The last quarter's report, the company's profit is positive. I stopped writing. How much? Not a lot, ma'am. But it's stable. I nodded, looking at the table of figures. The numbers were no longer an emergency red, but showed a system running healthily. And that was far more important than a large short-term number. Maintain it, I said. Yes, ma'am. Linda smiled. This time, it wasn't a tense smile, but one full of confidence. She left me alone in the familiar office. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the desk and neatly arranged documents. I suddenly realized that this room had finally, truly become mine. Not because I seized it, but because I deserved it. That afternoon, I received a call from Ashley. I looked at her name, hesitated for a moment, then answered. Claire, her voice was no longer as weak as before, but more steady. What is it? I want to say thank you. I was silent. I'm starting to get used to my job, she said. It was really hard at first, but I think I can do it. I didn't respond right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was listening not just to her words, but to the change in her tone. I won't dare ask for your help again, she continued. I just wanted to say, I understand now. I looked out the window at the bright sunlight. Understand what? That no one has an obligation to support my life. A simple sentence, but it was enough. I nodded slowly, though she couldn't see. Good. Take care, Claire. You too. I hung up. Nothing more needed to be said. Some conversations are sufficient when ended at the right moment. In the evening, I received a message from Arthur. Claire, this week I will finalize all the administration. The stock will be transferred to your name. I looked at the screen, unsurprised. But this time, I no longer postponed it. All right, Arthur. I'm ready. After sending it, I put my phone down. My feeling wasn't excitement, but a calm acceptance. Because I understood this wasn't something that came to change my life, but a part of my life. A part that I was now mature enough to accept without being swayed by it. The following days passed more quickly than I had expected. The company entered a stable phase. New projects began to move forward. The team became more solid, and I no longer had to be involved in every little detail. I could take a step back, observe, and direct when necessary. This distance was what gave me time to see myself. One night, I stood on the balcony as usual, looking down at the city. The lights still stretched out endlessly. The wind blew gently, carrying a familiar coolness. But this time, it no longer made me feel alone. I remembered the first few days when I stood here with a feeling of emptiness, when everything had just collapsed, when I didn't know where to go. And then, step by step, I got through it. Not quickly, not easily, but steadily enough not to fall again. My phone lit up. A reminder I had set a long time ago. It contained only one line. Don't forget who you are. I looked at the words and smiled faintly. Not because I had just remembered, but because I no longer forgot. I turned off the screen and looked up at the night sky. There weren't many stars, but enough to see that above all the man-made lights, there was a universe far vaster. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, no longer needed to maintain a position in someone else's life. No longer needed to sacrifice for recognition. I just needed to live according to what I had chosen. And this time, I chose myself. The final days of the year arrived quietly, just as my life was slowly finding its stable rhythm after all the turmoil. I no longer measured time by major events, but by the mornings I woke up with no weight on my chest, the afternoons I could finish work on time, and the nights I stood on the balcony looking at the city with no unanswered questions in my mind. It was this simplicity that I had never valued before. The company, after nearly half a year of restructuring, no longer looked like a building on the verge of collapse. It had become a system that ran clearly and transparently. Every department knew what to do. Every person understood their position. I no longer had to be present at every meeting or handle every minor issue. I could take a step back, observe, and direct. Not because I was letting go, but because I had built a foundation strong enough to stand on its own. Miss Claire, Linda entered the room with a faint smile. The year-end report exceeded the target. I took the document and opened it page by page. The numbers were not just good, but also stable. No strange spikes, no holes to patch. And that was what mattered most. Good work, I said. Linda bowed slightly. Thanks to your guidance, ma'am. I shook my head slowly. Thanks to everyone's hard work. She smiled and left me alone in the familiar office. The evening sun streamed in, no longer harsh, but gentle, just as my life had also softened after passing through hard days. That afternoon, I received a message from Ashley. Claire, I've been hired as a permanent employee. I read it, unsurprised, but paused for a moment. The salary isn't great, but I can live independently. The next message came. I saw it and typed a reply. Good. Keep trying. Not long, but enough. Some relationships don't need to go back to how they were, it's enough for them to continue in a different way. A week later, I received an invitation to the opening of a small company. The sender's name was Ethan. I held the invitation card, staring at the clearly printed words. Not fancy, not grand. Just a simple invitation with no personal message. I didn't make a decision right away, just placed it on my desk. On the day of the event, I worked as usual, handling meetings, signing documents. Everything went on as a normal day. But when evening came, I stood in front of my desk, looked at the invitation once more, and then took it. Not because I felt I had to go, but because I wanted to close everything completely. The opening event wasn't large. Just a small office space, a few desks and chairs, some potted plants, and a brand new nameplate. I entered, and no one noticed me at first until Ethan saw me. He was stunned for a moment, then approached. Claire, his voice was calm. No more haste, no more tension. Congratulations, I said. Thank you. We stood there, not too close, not too far, like two people who had once walked the same path and then turned in different directions, not looking back, but still able to see each other at a brief intersection. I didn't think you would come, he said. Me neither, I replied. He smiled faintly. But I'm glad you did. I nodded, looking around. The space was simple but tidy. No luxury like before, but a real beginning. I'm starting over, he said, as if explaining. That's good, I replied. Not asking further, not judging, just acknowledging. A few moments later, I placed an envelope on a table. A little something from me. He saw it, but didn't open it. I don't need it. I know, I cut in. But this isn't for you. He was stunned. It's for a new beginning. He was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Thank you. Not many words, but enough. I didn't stay long. Just a few minutes. Then I excused myself without looking back, without any feeling of heaviness. Because I knew our lives were each on their own track and no longer needed to intersect. As I stepped outside, it was already dark. The streetlights were on. The atmosphere was no longer as busy as during the day. I paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and continued on my way. My phone vibrated. A message from Arthur. Claire. Everything is finalized. I saw it and smiled. All right, Arthur. Just one word. But it contained everything. I got into my car and started it. The car moved slowly through the bright streets. This time, the feeling was no longer the same. Not searching, not running, but a very clear movement. I knew where I was going and why I was going there. Arriving home, I stepped onto the balcony. A habit that had become part of me. Looking down at the city. The lights still stretched out endlessly, but this time, I no longer felt small in their midst. I stood there for a very long time, not thinking about the past, not worrying about the future, just being in the present moment. And in that moment, I understood one very clear thing. It wasn't that I had won a battle, nor that I had lost something. It was that I had returned to being myself. A version that no longer needed to depend on anyone to exist. No longer needed to prove my worth through sacrifice. No longer needed to hold on to a relationship just for fear of loss. I had gone through a marriage, a devastation, a journey to reclaim what was mine. But the most important thing was not what I got back, but what I had learned. That kindness is not wrong, but it must have boundaries. And that sometimes, letting go doesn't mean losing, but is the only way to save yourself. I smiled faintly. The city lights were still on, life went on. And so did I. If you have followed this story to the end, perhaps what lingers in your heart is not just emotion, but a profound pause. A pause to ask yourself, in this life, how many times have we given without leaving anything for ourselves? Claire's story is not one experienced by just one person. It is a reflection of many among us. People who once believed that with enough sacrifice and enough patience, everything would get better. But life doesn't work that way. There are relationships where the more we give, the more it is taken for granted. There are people who, the more we yield, the further they push. And sometimes we lose not because we are weak, but because we chose to endure for too long. Claire was once like that. She was not less intelligent, not less capable, and not without opportunities. But what ensnared her for 5 years was something we all know well. Love and trust. Trust that the person she loved would change. Trust that family would eventually understand. Trust that she just needed to try a little harder. But life does not reward blind patience. Life only gives back what we allow others to do to us. Claire's turning point was not when she had money, or when she took back her company. Her turning point was when she said one simple word. Stop. Stop funding someone who is irresponsible. Stop tolerating what is inappropriate. And stop hurting herself. That was not cruelty, it was awareness. And from that moment on, everything began to change. You see, Claire did not retaliate in a loud way. There was no drama, no need to prove who was right. She simply took back what should never have been given and let everything fall back into place. A company collapses not because it is destroyed, but because its foundation is rotten. A person loses everything not because it is stolen, but because they never truly owned it in the first place. That is the law of cause and effect. Not something distant, but the very real result of every small choice in life. And the most beautiful part of this story is not Claire's success, but the way she let go. She didn't look back, didn't hold grudges, didn't live in the past. She moved forward with calm. Forgiving not to reconnect, but so she would no longer carry the burden. Helping not because of lingering feelings, but because she didn't want to become a bitter person. And leaving not because she lost, but because she finally understood what she deserved.